Hey everybody, welcome to McFarland Minutes. I'm Natalie McFarland, founder and president of McFarland Productions, director at Off Your Rocker Films, and your host. In these episodes, you can expect deleted scenes, in-depth campaign reviews, project highlights, marketing concepts, book reviews, and a deep dive into the creative process at Off Your Rocker Films. We'll also be covering invaluable lessons on mentorship, leadership, and the business of it all. We are so excited to be releasing our episodes every Sunday as your soft launch to Monday. Hey everybody, welcome to McFarland Minutes, your soft launch to Monday, picking up again with our 12-step creative process. It still sounds like we're sitting in a circle and like saying, anyway, it's not an AA meeting. It is the 12-step plan to getting a successful video production done, right? And really this can be applied to anything that you're working on. From a campaign perspective, you can kind of reapply these same principles across to anything. But for the purposes of this series, we're talking about video production. So we've done what is the problem? We've done ideation. We've done goal determination. We've done strategy. Now we're in May. So here we are with storyboarding. And so Ryan and I talked a little bit before we started this episode, and storyboarding, I think, is like the fun part, right? We have a lot of fun kind of dreaming up what this thing is going to look like. And then making sure we've got a backup plan, which we'll talk about later. But Ryan, you have some notes related to storyboarding. I'll let you kick this off.
Yeah, well, I love that you mentioned this is the fun part because I totally agree with you, right? And like you said, we were talking about this earlier. To me, this is one of the most fun parts of this because you get to kind of dream in a way, right? You get to be as creative as your mind can limit, right? I mean, the only ceiling in this case is your imagination. Well, I suppose you could argue your equipment also, but as of right now, right, anything that you want to complete, right, you can talk about, hey, can we do this? How can we do this? Such stuff like that, right? Which I think is really fun. And hand in hand with that is finding other people or agencies, companies, movie studios, right, that have been able to complete something similar to this before you. And I think that there are many steps into maybe just looking at how they did it, watching how they did it, or, I mean, depending on how far you want to go, reaching out to them and asking, how did you do this if you can't figure it out? And I think being able to kind of collaborate or pull chunks of, or being able to just find things that influence and inspire you and then take that into your own work as you're starting to imagine what you want to do for this project or with this client, I think that is a key part of starting your storyboard and, like you said, a fun part.
Yeah, this is totally where we take all that research that we've done, all the backstory to this and what problem are we trying to solve, all those things that we've already talked about. This is where we take that and turn it into a narrative, right? Something somebody's actually going to remember. I just spoke about this actually sort of recently in a speech, but it's ironic because I'm going to say like stats and figures don't work, and then I'm going to follow this with a stat. But people really are looking for a narrative, and people are statistically, this is the irony, statistically 22 times more likely to remember a story or remember a concept if it was presented to them in a narrative, in a story form, rather than in stats and figures, right? Like we can talk about the technicalities of how something is built all day long, right? And the features, and I don't know, maybe it's a carbon fiber, whatever, right? But if we tell it to them in a way that's relatable, that they can see themselves in it, that's where the magic really happens from a memory perspective. So storyboarding is where we get to take all the stats and figures that we figured out prior to this, that are the solutions that we're trying to provide to whatever the problem is, and then we get to turn it into a story. So, this is really where narrative becomes real for the project.
Yeah, and I think with that, one thing that often I think maybe slips people's minds is this isn't something that you and I have to worry about quite as much because when we are shooting with clients or individuals, they're usually in what I would consider their natural setting, right? We are often going out. We're not usually bringing people into studios. However, when maybe other companies are bringing people into studios and things, they have to take every detail into consideration that helps build that story. For example, down to the wardrobe, the clothes that these people are wearing, anything, even for like a 15-second Instagram ad, right? Where somebody
Mm-hmm.
could just be like talking in their car, what it looks like. I mean, these have stories, right, that are trying to connect with their target audience, and it just so happens to be that their target audience at that point is used to watching videos of people talking in their car, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a way that shares its own narrative, which is powerful for that target audience. Not my favorite narrative, not what I think is most powerful, but I think whether it is a quick 15-second video or TikTok, whatever you want to call it, that seems casual and unbothered, up to short films that are telling stories of products, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think each is tailored in its own way specifically to connect that target audience. And I think that also goes into the storyboarding process. And it's kind of funny how you can end up on two completely different sides depending on what you decide your viewer is most in touch with. But in a way, it's still, I guess, considered storyboarding, no matter how long your project ends up being.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really like, to the credit of the talking to you in a car, pretty relatable, right?
Right.
That's really what are we trying to achieve here from a storyboarding perspective is can we create a relatable story? And maybe the relatable story is sitting in a car. I agree with you. Not my favorite version of this, but we have done rolling down the road interviews and those do really well, right? In the right situation. So I think that, yeah, totally. I think like this is where we create that I see myself in that situation feel the sense of belonging that comes through us. Okay, let's talk about our storyboarding process
Let's do
because
it.
it's a whole thing and it is a lot of fun, but we usually jump on calls together. All of us have kind of gotten familiar with the project from all the steps previously, and now we're going to write a storyboard related to that. Ryan, what is step one?
I think for me, what is step one? This is so odd for me to say out loud because usually I feel like I just start typing, right? I've never
Yeah.
actually taken a step back and thought about what is step one for me. I love that we're doing this series. This is helpful for me as
Mm-hmm.
well. For me, I think step one is probably thinking about general who, what, when, where, why. Like we already talked about that, but step one, who are we looking at and where are we looking at them, right? When I think about those Ag Texas storyboards that you brought up earlier, right? We've got different subjects on each different location, right? What do these subjects look like? What do they like to talk about? Things like that. And I think from that perspective, you can kind of have some of your stories be drawn out on its own. For example,
Mm-hmm.
when we went to Dumas, correct? That was our last location.
Yep.
We almost changed the storyboard in the truck on the way over because we learned about their mother who was there, right? Who had been involved with the farm for over 90 years, right?
Yeah.
And
She
just
turned
her
100
involvement,
this year.
great for her. Her involvement as a character completely changes our storyboard, right? And if we would have known about her beforehand, then we would have written our storyboard differently. So I think that's important to know who
Yeah.
you're actually working with. But I think that's almost like that's like step point five. In that case, step one for me then is going to be kind of a mood board, right? It's going to be a general inspiration of other work that I like that I've seen, other work that I've done before that we've done as a company, right? For how I want this project to look and feel and sound. I guess sound doesn't totally include a mood board, but if you see a gravel road, you know how it's going to sound, right? I don't think this is imperative, but I do think that it helps you kind of check your work as you're going.
I think you know what a gravel road sounds like conceptually, right? But do you want to include it is a choice too, right? Like that does communicate some kind of mood. I do think like the mood board, you use the word feel, like what it feels like, right? And I think that's really what we're after on the mood board side. And I do think it is like kind of step one, the precursor to the storyboard. It's like, what do we want this to feel like? And then maybe it's the hyped up, right? Maybe it's for an event. We want it to feel like a party, right? Maybe the thing is, I want it to feel peaceful. I want it to feel relaxing. I want it to feel adventurous, whatever the thing is, right? Once we know what that feeling word is, we can really surround some short narrative around that, out the other side. So if this is like a 30-second commercial, let's pick a story that we can tell in 30 seconds that has the plot diagram, right? let's have a storyline from start to finish that we can tell, that is some small snippet that, one, has the feel that we need it to, but two, communicates something about whatever the subject is that we're trying to portray. So we've talked a lot about Ag Texas, and the one that sticks out in my mind, I believe it was Amarillo, but Larry, great farmer guy who's done it for a million years, and just exactly the person that I hoped he was, right, when we were sort of writing this in our heads. But what's one story we could tell about Larry? Okay, well, the obvious one is Larry harvesting, right? We weren't there during harvest, so that's not going to work. So I thought, okay, well, what does the end of a day look like we as a group thought, what does the end of the day look like for a farmer, and it's probably parking at the house. It's probably double checking your equipment real quick. It's probably, long day and walking into the house to finish it off. And probably, hopefully, there's dinner waiting for you if you didn't eat it out in the field, right? And so how can we communicate the end of a day like that? So we wrote a storyboard around that. And I think it gave that sense of like satisfaction, this sense of completion, this sense of success, right? Which we were trying to communicate in partnership with Ag Texas, right? So the concept is Ag Texas becomes the partner for your farm's success, right? And so this end of the day feel sort of provided that successful, completion of a hard day's work kind of feel. So we wrote a storyboard on that.
Yeah, and it was awesome. And with that, right, when you're actually drawing up that storyboard, my step one at this point, I think is many other people's step one, but it's the establishing shot, which ties in with your hook as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And your establishing shot is going to convey so many different, I don't want to say everything, but so many different things. And we were actually just talking about this as well. You see this a lot in movies, right? The establishing shot that they choose, whether it's calm, whether it's aggressive, right? However they want to establish the start of the movie, that sets the tone for the rest of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, even when you walk away from a movie, you're walking away saying, that movie was awesome, but that first shot, that is what got me. And
Yeah.
I think that you can make a really powerful statement with your first shot, just as equally powerful, if not more powerful, than your final shot. And so I think it's something that you cannot just skip over, right? Your first shot has to convey how you're supposed to feel.
Yeah. I'm not going to give it away, so don't worry, Ryan. But Kevin and I just went and saw Hail Mary. Ryan's about to go see it. It's a new movie, Ryan Gosling. Anyway, opening shot, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but opening shot is like a roller coaster of emotion. And it like probably took me 45 seconds, a minute to decide like what the tone of this movie's going to be, because it was like just this series of almost chaos and like confusion. And like that really is kind of the point of this first scene, is like this chaotic confusion piece. And it really sets Ryan Gosling's character up for like what's going to happen to him through this whole thing, right? So you're almost like presented with a problem immediately. But the way the scene is done, like I think it takes probably at least 3 minutes before there's any like verbal narrative, like before he really says anything. There's just like a lot of things happening at first. I can't wait for you to see this movie because you're going to know exactly what I mean. But like at first I'm like, oh, am I going to like this movie? And then like 10 seconds later, I'm like, oh, it's going to be a funny movie. And then like 10 seconds later, I'm like, why is everyone confused? So it takes a minute to decide like what direction are we going here, which was a great hook, right? That's what you're talking about, is like, what is that establishing shot and how do we pick that? Almost like this is the blank page syndrome, right? Where writers get like writer's block because it's like, how the heck do I start this thing? but I do think like, man, that sucker's got to be strong. So what you pick there is going to absolutely set you up for what it's going to feel like the rest of the time. And if it doesn't, we haven't thought hard enough about that yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now going into the second part of this, this is how I see it. Natalie may see it differently, and I just up for discussion. To me, you've got depending on how long uh, your video is that you're working on, right? You look at an average story map, right? It's got the introduction, and then I'm not gonna remember all of them, but you've got your rising action, and you've got your climax, and then your falling action, your conclusion, right? Sometimes you've got to squeeze all of that into a short amount of time, right?
15 seconds sometimes.
15 seconds sometimes, right? And especially with a commercial at the end, your conclusion is pretty significantly long because you need the tag out and you need the website plug and you need the logo, right? So sometimes your timing is just off for a couple things. So generally, right, we can use Larry again. We've got this idea for Larry, right? We know what we want to convey. And rather to me than splitting it up into those different story actions, I look at the entire story that we're wanting to convey as a whole, and I look at it in shots, right? I say, okay, we can convey this with this shot. We can talk about this with this shot. We can show Larry in this shot, right? But I'm at this point, I'm not really thinking necessarily in direct order or with time on it. I'm thinking about what we want to show and how we want to show it. And after I've got that down, then I can go through and I can do the body of this, right? I can talk about, or not talk, I can end up cutting through, okay, I know that we want to show Larry opening up the hood or the side panel, right? And we're going to shoot that wide, and we can probably do it in about 3 seconds, right? But I don't want to do that backwards and say, okay, we've got a 3 second gap here. What are we going to show? I want to know what we're going to show and then decide how long we're going to show it for.
Yeah.
And I think that I like to do it through there and work my way to the conclusion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it starts with a visual, like let's go through and just list, okay, what do I want to see on screen first? And then I'm going to determine the time. Next, I'm going to go through what the heck am I going to hear, right? And this is not the voiceover piece yet. This is, going into the next step from visual timeline where we've now timed out how long we think each shot's going to take us to make sure we can actually do it in the amount of time that we need to, or stretch some things if we need more. How we're going to shoot it, that sort of thing. But the next thing is what am I going to hear from an ambience perspective, right? Is it birds chirping or is it not birds chirping? Is it wind? Is it not wind? Is it gravel? Is it the door opening and shutting? Am I going to skip any of those noises? Are we doing this in total silence, right? From an ambience perspective. So that piece then helps our audio team plan that out when they're there on site, but it also helps us further convey a message, right? There's a Nike commercial that Ryan already knows that I'm obsessed with this commercial, but it's Find Your Greatness. I think it's Find Your Greatness.
So,
yeah,
I
is
think
the
it's fine.
campaign.
Yes.
So this kid who is not particularly in shape, and he maybe, I don't know, how old is he, Ryan? Maybe 14 or something like that. He's not
Anywhere
real
from
old.
12 to 14. Yeah, probably
Something like that.
below driver's license age.
Yeah, I don't think he's like kind of preteen or early teenager, but he is running. Well, at first you just see a gravel road, right? And the only thing you hear is like a teeny tiny amount of like wind ambience. There's no music, nothing else happening here. And in the far off, you can kind of see this person, but you don't know anything about them yet. And as they run down the road, the footsteps on gravel get a little louder and a little louder and a little louder until he's caught up to us now on cameras, right? So we can see that he's sweaty. We can see that he's clearly been running around a while. We can hear the footsteps better. We can hear him breathing, right? All the challenging things that come with running down the road. If you're not the most fit person in the world, hi, that's me. Running down the road and the challenge that's been presented to him, right? So the hook is that you're looking at this big open skyline and you're hearing something in the far off, but you don't really know what it is, right? And then as they run towards you, it gets louder and almost like crescendos, if you were talking about music, right? It crescendos into this sort of resolution of like, I get the concept. But the interesting thing about this particular one is that we hear from an ambience perspective, ambient farmland, a little bit of wind. It's pretty rural, like clearly quite a ways out. You don't hear any traffic. You don't really hear any birds or anything like that. It's just way out, very much in the middle of nowhere sort of feel, right? And then the running on the gravel and his breathing and all of those things become in this particular Nike commercial's case, the totality of the audio aside from the narrator. So there's no music or anything that goes under that, but it does bring you into that scene. You're almost like sitting, I mean, it's a commercial, but you almost feel this sense of like sitting on the edge of your seat, like looking for the resolution to this thing. Like where is the resolution of this plot diagram story going to fall, right? And then, so ambience, I guess my point is ambience is my next step, and it really will change, like depending on what you do and don't include, it really changes the feel of the piece, whatever it is, commercial, long form, whatever.
I totally agree. And part of why I agree with that is there are elements that can completely change a story that you never even see.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are things that we could have added to Larry's commercial that you would have never seen them. You only heard them, but it would completely change how his story is told.
Sure.
Small example that wouldn't completely change that we probably had to cut. Larry had about 7 or 8 kittens going around his farm at any given time that were adamant on getting everybody's attention and did a good job. However, we didn't really play that into our storyboard, and we ultimately decided that they likely did not contribute a large piece of what we were trying to convey at the time. However,
the train going by, the blasting site nearby that's a military testing area, all those things were there, but not part of the story.
yes, this is obviously an extreme example. But if we would have plugged in like machine gun fire in the background of Larry's commercial, right? It doesn't matter if you see it, but if you're hearing it, obviously that's going to change, right?
You're like, did I just get transported to D-Day in Normandy, right? Like, where am I right now?
Right. And I know that's an extreme example, but you guys would be amazed how easy it is to confuse what one sound is for another sound, right? Not saying that you're accidentally going to pick up something that sounds like machine gun fire, but it would be easy for your audience to get confused if you don't very deliberately and intentionally plan what they are going to hear. So I think it's crucial that you put that sounds like category right next to the looks like category.
Yeah. Okay, so next thing is I think we don't necessarily select in the Ag Texas case, we knew we were going to be making custom music, right? So we knew that there was going to be a sound that was familiar to every single one of these pieces, but we did choose like music style, right? So like in the case that we haven't quite selected music yet, there might be music style, right? Am I looking for like kind of a driving Texas highway sort of feel, which was the case of Ag Texas? Am I looking for serenity? Am I looking for nothing? I think at some point in time, or this is the point in time where we are starting to talk about, okay, what does the music at least feel like? What style are we after here?
Yeah. And I think one way that I've been able to kind of help with that is, and this is kind of silly, but I'll look at a mood board, right, that I've put up, and I'll have songs queued up, and I'll look at the mood board and I'll listen to the song and I'll say, does this fit, right? Does this feel what I want it to feel like? And putting myself in the viewer's shoes, is this the phrase I learned in college is mise en scène. I don't know directly what it translates to, but it generally means feel of the movie. Is this the mise en scène that I want to establish for the audience? And I am maybe it is not the fastest way to do it, but if those boxes are checked, I'm adding the song, and I'm going to keep the song in my pocket until I decide it is not the song, because
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have it than have to go back and find it again. I'd rather have a couple options.
Right.
Uh, and you're right, in the Ag Texas case, and in a lot of cases, we have early on established the song we're going to use. But
Mm-hmm.
if that's not the case, I am a big supporter of having multiple options beforehand and then bringing them in and seeing how they feel with the footage that you captured. But I I agree with you that beforehand we've got to at least think of the type of song we're going to use. Otherwise, you might end up shooting something that doesn't match your storyboard necessarily because, well, I wouldn't say it doesn't match your storyboard, but maybe it doesn't match the overall tone you were going for because your song is almost, to me, how you inject emotion into the story, right?
Yes.
It's maybe you could describe it as seasoning, but it's almost like imperative that you use it. It's like seasoning a barbecue.
Yeah.
You have to,
Yeah.
it's seasoning, but you have to use it. Otherwise, you don't have what you're aiming to have.
You're missing a major portion. Yeah, you don't realize you're missing it until you're missing it. Yeah,
Yeah.
this kind of brings me, and I don't think I actually sent this reel to you the other day. I'm notorious for sending too many reels. Sorry, you're
Hey,
welcome.
keep 'em coming.
But yeah, I think it was yesterday. I saw this reel and a piano concert, I don't know, a composer, a
Yeah,
pianist,
composer.
was playing a song that they had written, right? And you're kind of looking down on the piano keyboard, and there's sort of some flowers in there, and it's nicely lit, sort of documentary, dark style, that sort of thing. And on the screen, all it says right in the middle, they're only playing, there's no voiceover at all. And on the screen, it says, "What color is this song?" Right? And like, that's a weird conceptual question to ask somebody who hasn't played in the world of doing what we're talking about here, right? And like, color maybe isn't the thing that I would ask in this particular case when I'm talking about selecting music for this thing, but it does bring up a good point. Like, color grade becomes part of this decision too, right? We're probably pre-talking about, whether we're consciously or not writing this down, pre-talking about like the color grade of this thing. I don't know if you've ever looked at it, but like, horror movies always lean a little green, right? Kids movies are like neon. Everything is like overly bright, right?
Just bump the
Overly
saturation on this a
saturated.
bit. Bump it a
Right.
little bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Like, blue is usually more of a sad, blue gray is more of a sad sort of scene, right? So it was an interesting question there to say, like, what color is this song? Because it got me thinking about color grade. Like, in Larry's commercial, for example, we knew we wanted to do that warm end of the day, dusty sunlight, right? We wanted it to be kind of gold, kind of orange, right? We wanted to feel like the end of a day. And the end of a day kind of brings this like resolution, success, check off sort of feel, like we talked about earlier. So the color grade becomes part of it. Thinking about that applied to music, seeing that reel, closed my eyes and I thought to myself, okay, what color am I seeing and why? Right? For me, it was green for this particular piece. But the reason for where it felt like a fresh spring day. It wasn't like a scary, like I brought up green being more of a scary sort of feel, but it was more like spring feel, right? Like green grass, new flowers, really blue sky, birds chirping, that sort of thing, right? And it was interesting to think about that backwards. And like, okay, to me, like, I'm seeing green primarily, but the color grade is more Sound of Music-ish, right? Like, we're kind of this like happy, sort of like good contrast, like good bold saturation between things, like not quite kids movie, but somewhere between kids movie and, I don't know, musical for me, right? So anyway, I just thought it was an interesting example that I ran into, just yesterday or whatever, thinking about that. Like, music selection can give you a feel, and really the question, like, what color is this, was really asking you, like, what are you feeling from this, but it was making you name something related to it. So anyway, maybe not something people who are not working in video production would like conceptually be like, yeah. But for me, it was kind of a nerd out moment. So anyway, thought it was interesting.
I think people that don't work in video production they don't go like, yeah. However, if you get it wrong, they notice
They will be
something's
like,
wrong.
oh.
Yes, they'll know, they will react the opposite way.
Yeah.
And I think that's funny because it's one of those things that if you do it perfectly, right, it just kind of goes under the radar because it's a feeling, right? Your
Hmm.
color is conveying a feeling, and they're not really noticing that. They're just saying, "Oh,
If
that
it
movie felt very
matches,
warm," right?
yeah.
If it matches, they won't even notice it.
Hmm.
But if it doesn't match, they will very quickly notice,
Hmm.
and I think that's funny.
Same thing with ambience, kind of the same thing. Okay, so we've got visual, we've got ambience, we've got music selection, at least feel, or what we think we're going to use. The next thing I think is now narration, right? Are we going
Yes,
to, whether or not we're going to have one, number one.
right.
Number two, what is it they're going to say? And also, what type of voice are we looking for? This one has multiple parts in and of itself as well.
Type of voice is my favorite thing to talk about. One of the things that, well, okay, back up for a second, right? When you think about narration, you think about some of the greats, Morgan Freeman, for example. I mean, right? But then you think about why is he one of the greats, right? You can dig into the science of what makes a voice more enjoyable to listen to and I'm sure there's tons of science around it. But at the end of the day, I just like to say, right, that person has a good voice, right? And it could be a good voice for a hamburger commercial. It could be a good voice for a movie trailer, and you know the two different voices immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody knows how those two different voices sound. And I think when you're picking a voice for your specific project, you're right. There may not be an order in which, right? You may not have to say how does it sound? What are they saying? When are they saying it? I don't know if you need a specific order planned, but I think they're all equally important.
Yeah. I think, it really goes hand in hand with like the successful story structure, right? Like we could just go back to remember high school English and talking about a plot diagram, right? People expect a story to go it's going to be like this for you. Um, go in a certain pattern, right? The we're going to introduce you, blah blah blah. Then there's going to be a pattern, and then there's a guide that comes up, and then like there's a climax, and there's a falling action, there's a resolution, right? In voice, there's kind of the same thing, right? If you pick the wrong voice, you've missed this like expected pattern that will kind of break it. We've talked about this a bunch of times in different ways for every single part of this, but it's true of every part, right? If I pick, kind of the like, "Hey kids" sort of voice, right? But I'm laying it over like I don't know, a lawyer commercial who is specializing in car accidents. Like now we feel ironic, right? We did not communicate happiness. We communicated like irony and maybe condescension, right? So like having the wrong voice, even saying the same words can absolutely change what you actually meant when you sent it out the other side. And I think this is like where we get in trouble as a society with like text messaging and email, right? How many times did you read that sentence in a tone in your head and it is not the tone it was written in, right? So like, like yeah, sure, or yeah, sure, like that's a very different kind of communication. Like, am I brushing you off, or am I like, yeah, that, right? Am I excited about that thing? It's a very different thing. But if I just write yeah, sure, period, and send it to you, this is why millennials like the exclamation point so much, right? And LOL and smiley faces. You're welcome, world. But like the reason we do those things is because we're trying to communicate a tone. So if you think about voiceover artists, like selection of voice, style of read, pace of read, timing of read, whether or not there's air gaps in the sentence, which I'm clearly just not giving you any air gaps as I'm talking right now. But if there's air gaps or not in the sentence, all of those details communicate a tone, a feeling, right? So you can say the same thing, wrong voice, it's not going to match.
I think you bring up a fantastic point with the texting example, and I think one of the biggest examples I can think about that is, this came, I believe, with probably my generation, but is typing the word um.
Yeah.
There's no need to type other than to convey the cadence and emotion that the phrase you're typing is being delivered with, right? Because if you could just remove is I mean, if we're talking technically, is probably a typo, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to include it. The only reason it's included is to convey the way in which you're speaking, right? What you're talking about. And I don't think that um should ever be said in a voiceover. I don't think, at least I haven't come to that point yet.
Maybe.
Yeah, now that
I
I think
can't
about
I
it, I
can't
take it
I
back.
can't think
I'm
of like
sure
a
there's,
specific spot that we have utilized that, but I think that speaking like you would normally speak as a human's critical, which is why
yeah,
ChatGPT content is failing. You're welcome, world, for that.
I I think that the way the way to include it, right, what you're saying is with a person being completely and utterly real, transparent, honest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Chick-fil-A did this line of ads when they were releasing a new sandwich, and it was a family sitting on a couch, and they just give them the sandwich, and they're like, "All right, tell us what you think," right? And it was a goal in just having honest, completely honest reviews about what regular people thought about the sandwich, right? And I'm sure there were ums in that.
Yeah.
So I think in a setting like that, that's a critical point when you want to leave it just the way it is, right? You don't want to cut things out. And so I rescind my previous statement. That was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I think like sound words like that, right? Like my little, like it's got a lot of telling. It really like dictates a tone, right? Like, are you sure? Without saying, are you sure? Right?
yeah,
Um, and like I think you can utilize that in ways in voiceover as well. I mean, obviously inappropriate scenarios, but I do think that actually some of those like nuances of human speech, even like me repeating the word of twice, right, was me like trying to decide, okay, where am I going from here exactly in this sentence to explain this, right? But I didn't have to tell you already knew that that's what I was doing without me saying everything that I've just said in the last 13 seconds. Sorry about basically mansplaining that emotion to you, but to point it out is like, how can we communicate that by utilizing cadence of speech and some of those like sound non-words to communicate the feeling could be part of that too.
have you seen the new Google Pixel advertisement?
I don't know which one you mean.
Okay. I actually don't know how new it is because everything I watch is on streaming, and so they could play ads from 20 years ago if they wanted to. It is an advertisement where it's voiced over by who is supposed to be Siri on the iPhone, right? And so it starts
They
with,
do this a lot.
yeah, things like, "I was there from the beginning, we met, we spent every morning together," stuff like that. And then they make fun of Siri for, I mean, Siri's pretty underpowered for what it should be, and it says, right, it shows the subject in the video attempting to use Siri, and it goes wrong, and then the narrator says something along the lines of, "Now you've moved on, and we're still trying to process that," poking fun at Siri, still trying to process your request, right? But that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a point where they said or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And that's obviously a very specific setting, but it's a setting that fits very adequately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So narration is written, which means we basically have the framework for whatever the piece we're making. We've been using a commercial as the example here, so maybe we just stick to that here. But the reality is now we get on site and the weather isn't what it's supposed to be or whatever, which is what we're about to talk about in the next episode. So in June, we're going to talk about logistics. And this is pre-call logistics as well as like the what if planning, right? So we'll talk some about that. But with storyboards, I just want to give this caveat at the end of this one because we're going to talk about this in serious depth in the next two episodes, but that are related to this this creative process. But One of my favorite movie quotes, and I've probably talked about this already in this series, but and I've probably said it a million times in other podcasts, but Captain Cold in the Flash TV show, he says, make the plan, execute the plan, expect the plan to go off the rails, throw the plan away, right? So when you write a storyboard, we've written this as if it's an ideal world and everything's going to work out the way we want it to. So in the next couple of episodes related to this series, so June's last episode, July's last episode, we're going to be talking about logistics, which part of that is can we figure out what the plan is going to probably fail to, and can we come up with a secondary option, or at least have like a quick pivot solution in that. And then we'll talk about how we do that on site too, and how things go right, obviously, in both of those ways too. But so now we have storyboard, we move on to logistics. So thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. We are going to see you next month in this series, a 12-step creative process, end of the month, every single month, the last episode. So join us again next month in June for logistics, part of the creative process.